Welcome to Love Lies Chronicles.
I'd really appreciate your comment. It helps me understand if you enjoyed the story and how I can improve in future ones. I got the line about jokes while I was standing at the kitchen island with a folded brochure for a weekend cabin in Asheville. I'm Daniel Mercer, 38, regional sales manager based in Charlotte. Tuesday night, late enough that the neighborhood was quiet except for a dog 2 houses over. I'd finished a long run, showered, cleared the counter, and set the brochure down like it might do some of the talking for me. I wasn't planning a grand speech, just a simple reset. A drive up I-26, 2 nights, phones down, some air that didn't smell like stale office carpet and old coffee. For months, she'd been different in the small ways that grow teeth when you ignore them. Replies that were one word and late. A hand that moved off the couch cushion when my hand found it. That tilt of the head people do when they're already done listening. I kept telling myself it was workload, or the season, or the fact that I was on the road more this quarter. It's easier to blame the calendar than the person you married. So I tried small fixes instead of big conversations. I left her the better side of the avocado, ripe, not stringy. I set the thermostat to her number at night and wore a hoodie so she wouldn't shiver and make it my fault. I backed out of a weekend golf thing I wanted, told the guys I had other plans, then sat with her while she scrolled through her phone with the TV on mute. When she went to bed early, I went too, even if I wasn't tired, because that used to count for something. The getaway idea came after 2 weeks of false starts. No anniversary to hang it on, no holiday excuse. Just a quiet, normal Tuesday I figured I could change with a little intention. The cabin had a wood stove and a small deck that faced trees. Nothing fancy. A place where we could say the things we'd been storing away like old mail. I imagined coffee outside with our phones turned face down for once. I imagined listening without waiting to answer. I imagined apologizing if that's what it took. She came in from the garage with her gym bag slung over her shoulder and the car keys dangling from 2 fingers like she didn't care if they fell. I told her dinner was in the oven. Chicken, lemon, a pan of potatoes cut small so they'd crisp. She set the bag down without looking at the oven light and leaned on the island like a customer about to complain. I tapped the brochure with 1 finger and said I had an idea for the weekend. Just us. A drive, some quiet. Take your jokes on the road, not me. No smile or softening. Not even a shrug to pretend it was playful. She took a sip from the water bottle, scrolled a notification with her thumb, and walked past me toward the stairs. If there was a draft, it came from her. I didn't follow. I let the sentence sit where it landed. The oven timer beeped, and I turned it off. I pulled the pan out with a towel and set it on a trivet. The smell made the room feel like a place people lived. I covered the pan with foil and waited to see if she'd come back down. She didn't. A minute passed. 3, 10. I ate standing up, a plate at the counter like a bachelor. When I finished, I put her portion in a container and wrote the date on the lid because old habits take longer to die than marriages. There's a switch you feel when you're done trying. It doesn't click loud. It's more like a silent yes in your chest. Not a threat. Just permission to stop begging something to be what it isn't. I rinsed my plate and wiped the counter and realized I wasn't disappointed. I was free of the job I'd given myself, repairman for a machine that had already been retired. I went to my office and opened the bottom drawer. 2 months ago, I'd put a manila folder there because the cold had started then, and I don't lie to myself for very long. Inside were 3 business cards from attorneys people I trust had recommended, a printout of a basic checklist for separating accounts, and a copy of the deed because paperwork disappears when you need it if you're careless. I hadn't decided anything that night 2 months ago. I'd just made it so deciding wouldn't require panic. On the bookcase sat a small black camera facing the hallway. I'd installed 2 after a rash of package thefts on our block and 1 inside when a pipe in the upstairs bath started weeping through the ceiling last year. Practical reasons. I travel, and it used to make her feel safer to check the feed at night if she heard something. I leave them on now because I like to know when the dog walker shows up, and because the plumber claims he came once when he didn't. They mind their own business until they don't. I closed the drawer and left the office light off. In the living room, the brochure still lay where I'd set it. I folded it back up and slipped it into the recycling. No ceremony, just paper going where paper goes when it doesn't matter anymore. Upstairs, the bedroom was dark. I could hear her brushing her teeth, the quick, hard way she does when she's irritated. I plugged my phone in on my side. She climbed into bed and turned away before I could see her face in the glow. We both lay there quiet. The fan hummed like nothing had changed. Sleep didn't come. I went back downstairs and sat in the half-light of the kitchen with a glass of water and my running shoes still on. There's a difference between being alone in a house and being alone in a marriage. One is quiet, the other is static. I thought about every time I tried not to take things personally, every time I decided she was stressed, every time I told myself patience was love. Maybe it is. Maybe it was also fear of what a decision would ask of me. I looked at the calendar on my phone and the travel schedule that had been my excuse for too long. Memphis next week, then Raleigh, then home. All of it suddenly negotiable. I opened notes and wrote one line, no more persuading. It wasn't a manifesto. It was a boundary I could remember when my chest felt too light. I added 2 more lines. Call the bank, pick one lawyer, and close the app before the list got long enough to look like anger. I put her container in the fridge and turned the latch on the back door and checked that the garage light was off. The house felt neat and finished, like a room staged for a showing. Upstairs again, she was asleep or pretending. I lay on my back and stared at a ceiling we'd repainted last spring after the leak, and I let the quiet tell me the truth. I had brought a brochure to a closed door. She'd answered with a joke that wasn't a joke. That was the whole story. The morning would come, and with it whatever came with it. All I knew, lying there with the fan doing its best, was that I wasn't going to audition for my own life anymore. I didn't need a confession to grant me permission. The cabin could wait for some other couple. The road could have my jokes. What I had left was a spine, a drawer with a folder, and a line I wasn't going to cross again from either side. The marriage wasn't in trouble. It was finished. I just hadn't said it out loud yet. Morning found her at the island again, elbows on the marble, phone face up like a partner. The travel brochure was gone, folded into last night's recycling with the rest of my wishful thinking. In its place I set a manila folder. Clean edges. I poured coffee, slid the folder to center, and sat. She kept scrolling a second longer, as if finishing the performance mattered more than starting the conversation. You're serious? She barely glanced down at the paperwork, but the way her thumb hovered over the screen told me she'd read the first page without reading it. I am, I said. She laughed once in that short, breathless way meant to shrink the other person. So this is you having a tantrum. This is me making a decision. The room felt larger than yesterday, like something had vacated it overnight. Her eyes moved across the lines, the petition, the dates, the signatures. She flipped a page, then another, then pushed the folder back as if it were sticky. You'll regret this, she said. You think it's going to be neat? You think you're the only one who knows how to make decisions? I'm the only one who needed to make this one. I took a sip, because it gave my hands something to do besides point at the door. She wanted a fight. She wanted me to fill the room with explanations she could twist. She waited for the pleading, the assurances, some spill of words she could dam up and redirect. I let the silence sit for both of us. When she finally stood, the stool legs shrieked across tile, more volume than exit. She left the kitchen without touching the folder. Work absorbed the next few hours. Spreadsheets, a supplier call, 2 teams asking for the same pricing exception by different names. My phone buzzed here and there with nothing useful, promotions, a delivery update, a group chat I muted months ago. At 11, she texted, "We need to talk today." I typed back, "We will." The economy of it annoyed her. 3 dots pulsed, disappeared, pulsed again, then stopped. She liked to run scenes. I was now giving her bullet points. When I came home for lunch, she'd staged the counter like a cross-examination. Papers spread, a pen placed diagonally, a glass of water sweating for effect. She stayed standing, arms folded. So I'm just supposed to sign my life away because you're in your feelings? You're supposed to decide what you want without turning me into a punchline while you think, I said. These are next steps, not a trap. Right? Because you're reasonable. The sarcasm felt lonely in the room. What about housing? I'm not leaving. I didn't say you were, I answered. We'll handle it like adults. She tilted her head, the same adjudicating angle from last night. Adults. Okay. Her eyes moved to the corner of the living room, where the small black camera sat near the books. She'd forgotten it existed until that second. I watched the flicker of recognition cross her face, then be smoothed over by resolve. She stepped closer to me, but kept the island between us. You want adult? Fine. But I'm not getting pushed out of my home. I won't be bullied. If you try. She left the sentence open like a trapdoor. When I didn't step into it, she grabbed her keys and left. I ate standing again, like yesterday, but the feeling was different. I rinsed the plate, checked email, finished the pricing memo I owed my boss. When the doorbell rang, it didn't surprise me. 2 officers stood on the porch, one older, one young enough to still look unsure in a hat. Professional faces, posture that said they'd rather this be easy. "Mr. Mercer," the older one said. "Mind if we come in?" "Of course." I stepped back and opened the door wider. She was in the driveway, deliberately not walking up with them, phone at her hip, mouth set. Her hair was pulled into that high, tight knot she uses for performance days. "We received a call," the younger officer began. "Your wife is concerned about being forced out of the residence. She also reported verbal intimidation and indicated you might have grabbed her arm earlier. She has visible bruising." I looked at the officers and then at the corner of the ceiling where the hallway camera sits. "I understand. Would you like to see the footage?" The older one glanced at the younger, then nodded. "If you have it readily available, that'd be helpful." "It's cute," I said. We stepped into my office. I woke the monitor, opened the archive, and scrolled to the slice of morning I'd seen out of the corner of my eye when she headed upstairs after breakfast. The hallway angle catches the bathroom doorway clean. I hit play. There she was, mirrored twice by glass and lens. She rolled up her sleeve, pressed her fingers into the inside of her forearm, twisted, rubbed. Hit. Waited. Hit again. Checked. Adjusted the angle to avoid the camera and forgot about the mirror, which recorded her more honestly than she intended. She repeated the sequence until violet blossomed under the skin. When she stopped, she stared at the forming bruise for a long second, then exhaled like she'd earned it. No one spoke. The house made small old house sounds. The HVAC tick, a faint water rush in the upstairs pipes. The younger officer shifted his weight, then steadied. The older one cleared his throat. "That appears inconsistent with your statement, sir." He looked at me with that careful tone cops use when what they're saying is obvious but still needs a layer of respect. "Would you mind if we saved a copy?" "Take what you need," I said, and handed him a thumb drive from the pen holder. "There's also audio from the kitchen. No yelling, just coffee and paper." We walked back to the entryway. Through the sidelights I could see her on the driveway, pacing in short, sharp paths that wore lines into the gravel with each turn. The officers stepped outside to speak with her. Her gestures told the story. Palms up, palms out, palms to the sky, then arms folded when the words she wanted didn't land. The older officer's stance never changed. The younger one kept his hands visible and his face neutral. They came back in together, professionalism a shade tighter. "Mr. Mercer," the older officer said, "we're documenting the interaction. At this time, no action is required from you. We've advised your wife regarding the seriousness of filing inaccurate reports. We'll note the existence of your home security system and the footage you provided." "Understood. If there's any further contact that concerns you, feel free to call the non-emergency line," the younger one added, like he needed to say something helpful. "I appreciate it," I said. And I meant it, not as a performance, but because the room felt less heavy with the truth playing out on official shoulders. When the door closed and their cruiser turned off the street, the house exhaled. She didn't come back inside. A car door slammed. The engine receded. I stood in the foyer listening to the quiet find its level again. There's a moment after a structure gives way where you test the air for dust and find none. You expect rubble. What you get is floor. I put the folder back on the island, centered it like a level surface. I texted my attorney. "Minor development. We'll update with video." Attached the file. I called the bank about separating the last 2 autopays because if there's one thing contempt is drawn to, it's convenience. At dusk, a neighbor waved from the sidewalk. I waved back. The porch light came on by timer, the way I set it in the winter when I'm traveling. The ordinary worked as intended. I reheated leftover chicken, ate at the table, cleaned the pan. Upstairs, I laid a pair of duffels out on the bed, not as a threat, just preparation. When you know a storm is scheduled, you don't tape the windows for the wind. You secure what matters and let the weather say its piece. She returned after 9, footsteps clipped. The door opened and closed with more force than necessary. She stopped in the entryway long enough to look at the camera and then at me like she'd forgot to memorize both angles. "You think you're clever," she said, dropping her bag. "You think this is over. I think the truth is faster than both of us, I said. That video doesn't mean anything, she snapped. I was upset. You made me upset. I didn't make you hit yourself. Silence again, the kind that goes heavy quick. She broke it with a scoff that tried to sound like a plan. Fine. If we're doing this, we're doing it. Don't expect mercy. I don't, I said, and meant it. Mercy isn't what I was looking for. I wanted accuracy and distance. She went upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen until I heard the bathroom door close, then the blow dryer, then drawers. I put the legal pad away, turned off lights, and let the house become night. The day had pressed every lever she knew and found out they'd been disconnected. Pressure reveals structure. Hers was scaffolding. Mine was load-bearing. Tomorrow could bring paperwork or apologies, threats or theater. I'd already chosen the same answer for all of it. Quiet, clarity, and the next step forward. I woke before the alarm, made coffee, and opened the folder I'd kept for the day. I finally stopped mistaking patience for love. The police visit had clarified one thing I'd been avoiding. She wasn't going to meet me at the table. She was going to turn the table over and call it justice. I started with the ledger of small ties that keep people tangled long after they know better. Payroll rerouted to the individual account I'd opened months ago. Autopays reassigned. Her name removed from the last card I'd been slow to cancel, not out of generosity, out of habit. Passwords rotated, two-factor moved off shared email, recovery keys printed and slid into the safe. It wasn't secrecy. It was separation. At 9, I was in my attorney's office with the drive in my pocket. We'd spoken before, in hypotheticals. This time we talked in exhibits. The footage played on a wall screen in a room made for sober decisions. No commentary, just a timeline that didn't bend to anyone's performance. My attorney watched it all the way through, then rewound the first 30 seconds and watched again. A pen clicked once, then stopped. We filed. Petition, proposed temporary orders, motion to preserve electronic evidence. Notice to both parties that communications would route through counsel from this point forward. The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be. Sharp is what people use when they don't have facts. I had facts, and a case number to staple them to. Back home, I moved my clothes into the guest room. Not a symbolic exit. Just lines on a floor that would keep the next few weeks from devolving into hallway debates. I left a printed page on the kitchen island. House routines, bills already split, the dates a process server might arrive, so she could choose to be dressed and decent. The paper wasn't a provocation. It was a schedule. Midday, my phone lit with messages that thought they were emergencies. 2 long texts from her came in a rush. Paragraphs about betrayal and cruelty and what a real man would have done when his wife was in distress. I read them once and archived them to the folder my attorney had created. That's where words go when they're evidence instead of conversation. I wrote back one sentence. For all matters going forward, please contact counsel. Then I turned the phone face down and made a sandwich. She called. I let it ring into voicemail and turned the ringer off so she could decide how long she wanted to listen to her own echo. A minute later, the door opened hard enough to rattle the art on the entry wall. She found me at the sink, not busy, just rinsing a plate. Rage hates a neutral surface. It needs something to scratch. I kept my hands in the water and let her circle the kitchen with her monologue. I'd heard versions of it for months. Hearts wounded, intentions misread, the world misunderstanding her brilliant pain. I didn't interrupt. I let the faucet run and listened for the thing people reveal only when they believe they're winning. It arrived right on schedule, tucked into a sentence meant to scare me. She'd talked to a friend whose cousin got everything when she made a judge see what a dangerous man her husband was. There it was. The plan was escalation. I dried my hands, nodded once, and pointed to the paper on the island. The line about cameras preserving footage had a small star next to it now. We both looked at the star like it was a third person in the room. Then I went upstairs and closed the door to the guest room. That afternoon, I ran a quiet loop of errands that only look boring if you've never needed your life to be portable. A safe deposit box at a different branch. An extra external drive with the entire archive mirrored. AP. Box keyed and tested. A second phone added to the plan as a clean number for counsel and service confirmations only. No speech to the clerk about betrayal. A man checking boxes so the next month stacked straight. When I got home, I opened my laptop and recorded a simple inventory. The kind that prevents confusion 3 weeks from now when someone claims the blender is an heirloom. Serial numbers, photos, date stamped, stored twice. I added a note at the bottom. No removals without written agreement. People who intend to break things hate advance notice. I printed one copy and taped it inside the pantry door where it would be found by accident. I left another in the folder for the judge who'd eventually care about how calm this day had been. Evening brought the second wave. Manipulations look like weather until you've lived in them long enough to recognize the pattern. First came the soft rain. Nostalgia delivered in texts, photos of weekend mornings from 3 years ago, a playlist we built when we were still us. Then the wind, accusations, half-truths with edges, threats to tell everyone what kind of man I really was. Finally the lightning, one blistering paragraph about me being dangerous, the word she believed had leverage. I let each system pass without stepping outside to check the damage. A quiet house makes a storm sound like it's working harder than it is. At 9, I sent one last email to my attorney with 3 attachments: the texts, the voicemail transcription, and a photo of the paper on the island with today's date circled. He replied with the sentence that lands soft if you're prepared. Service set for Thursday. Expect escalation. Document, don't engage. There's a relief in instructions that match what you were already doing. She knocked on the guest room door once, then twice, then with her palm flat the 3rd time. I didn't open it. I didn't speak through it. The knocking stopped. I heard her walk away, then the bathroom sink, then a drawer. The house returned to its nightly rhythm, a metronome reset to something sane. Before I slept, I wrote 3 lines on the legal pad I keep on the nightstand. Not vows, just the shape of tomorrow. File the preservation letter to the precinct with the case number. Cancel the last joint subscription I'd missed. Move the framed photos into a bin so the walls stop lying about who we are. I capped the pen, turned off the lamp, and let the dark be only dark, not a room where I argued with ghosts. I wasn't punishing her. Punishment is the language of people who need the other person to understand. I no longer needed understanding. The hero part of this was a refusal to perform. I replaced speeches with filings, replaced pleading with boundaries, replaced hope with plans. I didn't need her to see it. I needed the judge to see it, the bank to see it, the future to sit on it and not wobble. I set my alarm, placed the folder next to my keys, and slept like a man who had finally stopped playing a game he never agreed to. The day after service, the house sounded like someone had turned the volume up on small things: the hinge, the ice maker, the soft thud of mail on the mat. Big things had already been said by paper. She tried to fill the gaps. Morning opened with guilt. A long message about how I'd overreacted to a bad week, attached to a photo from our first summer, me sunburned and grinning, her on my shoulders in the lake. I archived it to the case folder and answered with the line I'd committed to: please route all communication through counsel. 10 minutes later came the apology that wasn't: I'm sorry you're being so cold, followed by a request to pause the filing. Silence met each one. Silence held. By noon she pivoted to seduction. A dress I hadn't seen in years, perfume too loud for a kitchen, the careless brush of her hand across my shoulder as she reached for a glass. I let the touch fall off me like water and kept rinsing the spinach. You can't pretend I'm not here, she said, smiling with her eyes, voice lowered. I'm not pretending anything, I said, and stepped aside so she could reach the cabinet without stepping closer. A minute later the smile broke. Seduction is a script. It needs a partner's cues to finish the scene. I gave her none. The afternoon was anger. Doors closed too hard. A phone call on speaker so I could hear the words dangerous and afraid tossed to a friend who gasped at the right places. I didn't contest the theater. If she wanted a witness, the camera in the corner had a better memory than both of us. She left in a storm and came back just before dinner carrying it with her. Eyes rimmed red, shoulders squared for another round. I set a plate on the island for myself and ate with the same calm I'd used for the bank clerk and the judge's clerk and the officer's intake form. A steady fork terrifies people who came to flip tables. She escalated that night in a way I didn't expect. A group text pinged my phone. Her 2 closest friends, her sister, one coworker. The story was shaped to be swallowed. Soft victim edges with my name filling the blank spaces. Replies stacked fast with hearts and "We've got you," and one brave "Are you safe?" that looked good on a screen. I didn't reply. I forwarded the thread to counsel and turned my phone face down. The next day brought something less performative and more dangerous. An emergency petition for a protective order filed ex parte. I learned about it from my attorney, not my front door, which saved the cops a drive and saved me having to turn on another video. The hearing was set 3 days out. Expect emotion, my attorney said. We'll bring evidence. I spent that night doing ordinary things on purpose. Laundry, a run, wiping the stovetop. Because ordinary is a muscle you forget how to use when everything turns into a show. The hearing room was small and without mystery. A judge at a simple bench. A clerk who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. 2 chairs for counsel, and a handful of people learning, like us, how much of their life now fit inside a case number. She arrived with a different haircut and a softer sweater, the costume chosen for vulnerability. Her attorney did the talking. Mine did, too. I looked at no one but the judge, because this wasn't about convincing the gallery. Her side trotted out the bruised photos and language meant to catch the ear. Pattern, coercion, fear. My side rolled the footage and the timeline and the officer's note. The judge watched the mirror scene twice, leaned back, and exhaled through his nose. Petition denied, he said, not unkindly, and then, more like a hand placed flat on a table, and a caution to petitioner regarding credibility in future proceedings. It wasn't thunder. It was worse for her. Quiet accountability wearing a robe. The blowback started in the hallway. Her attorney's voice went from measured to scissored. You didn't tell me about cameras, I heard. And then, lower. You put me in front of a judge with that? She tried to cry. Tears don't start quickly when they're called on command. I didn't linger to watch the rest. I signed the paper my attorney slid toward me and walked into light that felt honest. Back home, the consequences kept arriving. The friend from the group text sent me a private message that started with, I don't agree with how she handled this, and ended with, for what it's worth, I saw the video. I didn't ask how she'd gotten it. People find truth when they want to keep their self-respect. I forwarded the message to counsel and left the social circle to police itself. Her last unpredictable move was bargaining with panic under its coat. She cornered me in the hallway outside the guest room. Let's make this disappear, she said. Withdraw. Reset. We tell everyone we had a rough patch. I looked at her like a person I'd once known and said the only true thing left between us. We're already telling everyone who we are. After that, there wasn't much to say. The circle around her started to thin. The coworker who'd believed the first version stopped liking her posts. The sister who defended her texted me to apologize for what she'd said in a rush. Even the neighbor across the street, who knows more about all of us than we do, waved with that small nod people give when they've revised their opinion. I took it the way you take a forecast that finally matches the sky and then go inside because it's still going to rain. I remained unreachable, not out of spite, but because the path forward was narrow and I didn't intend to stumble off it. Calls went unanswered. Texts went to counsel. The guest room stayed mine. The cameras stayed on. The paper stayed orderly. What broke wasn't just her strategy. It was the belief that attention would always meet it. When the attention died, the strategy did, too. By the end of that week, she had stopped performing in the kitchen and started disappearing into the bedroom with her phone. I heard the muffled sounds of new audiences, long voicemails to friends, a podcast in the background about narcissistic partners, the low hum of someone building a story from pieces that keep slipping. I measured the distance between my bed and the doorframe and knew that was the only distance I needed to maintain. Her game didn't end with a confession or a dramatic exit. It ended when everyone stopped believing it. That's what truth does when you give it a platform and refuse to share your microphone. I slept well that Sunday for the first time in months, because the world around us had started to see clearly. The next morning, the house sounded like itself again. Hinge, ice maker, mail, and my coffee tasted like a decision I could live with. Finalization day wasn't cinematic. No thunderclap. A clerk stamped papers, a judge signed where the yellow tabs told him to, and an older couple ahead of us whispered about parking validation like it was the heaviest thing in their lives. I stood there with my folder, watched a seal go down on the decree, and felt the same thing I'd felt the night I slid the brochure into recycling, a quiet yes. We didn't make eye contact. She wore the soft sweater again, hair down this time. A necklace I'd given her for an anniversary we'd stopped celebrating together long before we admitted it. Her attorney spoke to mine in a tone 2 sizes smaller than last week. Credibility doesn't grow back that fast. The mirror scene and the officer's notation had done the work speeches try to do. The order denied. Fees on that motion assigned. I walked out into the sun and did something practical. I called the realtor. The house had become a museum of scenes, and I didn't want a life that needed placards to explain what happened where. We painted over the scuffed corners, boxed what was worth keeping, labeled what was leaving. I found the travel brochure at the bottom of the paper bin when I broke it down for recycling day, a faded photograph of trees and a cabin with a deck. I slid it back into the bin without ceremony. Paper knows where it belongs. I kept the cameras on until the day the movers closed the truck and I signed a new lease across town. A clean 2-bedroom with light that didn't feel like it was filtering through old arguments. I chose it because it had nothing to correct. New corners. New hinge sounds. A kitchen island that hadn't been a witness. I bought a bed that wasn't ours and a cheap dining table that would do until I decided what permanence looked like again. I hung only one thing on the wall the first week. A simple clock so the room could tell me the truth about time without also telling me a story. People asked how I was. I told them I was busy. It wasn't a dodge. It was the only accurate measure. Busy transferring titles. Busy closing an account I opened when I was 23 and thought joint meant safe. Busy learning the route to a different grocery store and where the light switches were when I came home after dark. The ordinary became practice. Practice became steadiness. Steadiness felt like respect. She sent 3 messages in the first month. A long one about regret that was mostly about embarrassment, the kind of apology that says I'm sorry I got caught in a mirror. A short one about meeting for coffee to talk like adults, as if caffeine were a solvent for damage. A final one that used the words second chance like a coupon about to expire. I forwarded each to counsel, the way you carry sharp things by the handle. No reply from me. Silence isn't punishment when you've already said all the words that count. I changed my emergency contacts. I booked a physical I kept postponing. I joined a gym near the new apartment because the old run loop carried too many echoes. I learned how to cook for one without buying ingredients that rot in pairs. Tuesdays became laundry and phone calls. Thursdays became a long walk that ended at a bench behind the library where nobody performs because there's no one to applaud. The quiet got heavier before it got lighter. Poetic justice never arrived with trumpets. It showed up in smaller ironies. The coworker who'd amplified her first story stopped liking anything she posted and started nodding at me in the lobby like the way a person nods at weather they mispredicted. A neighbor from our old street emailed me a photo of a for sale sign 2 houses down, her friend's place, captioned with nothing. The realtor's flyer used the words fresh start above a kitchen indistinguishable from ours. We are all tempted to sell a rebirth that is really just a move. I deleted the email without a reply and went back to my spreadsheet. My lawyer closed my file with an email that read, simply, matter concluded. Attached was a PDF the length of a thin book, the record of how 2 people tried to quantify the unquantifiable and then did anyway. I printed the last page, signed my name where it asked for acknowledgement, and slid it into the safe with the recovery keys and the spare passport. Because grown men keep their records in places they can find them. Months from the hearing, I ran into her in the produce aisle. No audience. Just a basket and a phone and a face that recognized me before the rest caught up. We stood 3 feet apart and reached for different apples like we were strangers who knew trivia about each other's first half. She opened her mouth and then closed it. I did the same. That felt less like restraint and more like an accurate reading of the air. I paid for my groceries and walked out into a parking lot that didn't care about any of us. I don't tell a better story about her to make my ending cleaner. She made choices. I made mine. On a good day, that's all any of us can claim. On a bad day, the difference is whether your choices require an audience to feel real. Mine don't anymore. I have paperwork, a lease, a clock that tells time without rehearsing yesterday, and a legal pad with lists that end in checkmarks instead of arguments. If there's a lesson I carry into the next rooms, it's a simple one that took me too long to say out loud. Respect is not negotiable. In the way you decide, in the way you refuse to perform, in the way you keep your word to yourself when no one is grading you for it. She reached out once more, months later. One line in the subject, no body. Are you happy? I didn't open it. Happiness is a weather report I don't outsource anymore. I archived the message, took my coffee to the small balcony that faces nothing special, and watched the ordinary go by. Two kids on scooters, a man walking his old dog, a delivery truck rumbling towards someone else's door. The world kept its schedule, and so did I. There's just a life you either recognize as yours or you don't. I chose mine. I chose the quiet that isn't empty, the house that isn't haunted, the conversations that happen with people who aren't playing. And when the next person sits across from me at a table and wants to know who I am, I'll answer with the only clean sentence I earned from all of this. I don't negotiate respect.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.